The election is upon us. As Catholics, what issues matter most? How does our church teaching inform the way we vote? In our series on faithful citizenship, we're looking at our conscience to see how we can act rightly in how we vote, the sort of things we support in those that we vote for office. When it comes to the church, she has a body of Catholic social teaching, which has informed our modern way of life as we who are disciples of Christ seek to follow in his footsteps in the new contexts that our world presents us. So many issues are very complicated, and it's very hard to make certain judgments that are good in certain areas. So when we look at our faith life, we look also at how we act in society. Our church has taught many things about the fundamental dignity of human beings who have been created by God within this whole world as our home. Our church talks about the rights that people have, our responsibilities towards one another, and also speaks about the rights that we have in our economy, in our workplace. It speaks about the solidarity that we should have as a whole human family, not just in our own country, but throughout the world. It speaks about issues of justice and peace. And the church desires that we seek common good in society that we all share together. We all have a role to play in our political life. It's not just voting, it's also how we support the common good of our neighbors and our society through our actions, through our prayers as well. We must be concerned especially for the needs of the most poor and vulnerable in our society, those who are on the margins, who are often neglected. How can we better serve them, both through our own personal actions and through the action of government? The United States bishops have released, once again this election cycle, a document that will help us to reflect on our voting. And this document is called Forming Consciences for Faithful Citizenship. And as we look at this document, we are struck by the importance of the issues that our world faces today and our responsibility to participate as citizens in a government that is seeking to provide remedy to so many issues in our world. I'd like to read some quotations from this document from the bishops of the United States to help us as we reflect on our choice for voting. The threat of abortion remains our preeminent priority because it directly attacks our most vulnerable and voiceless brothers and sisters and destroys more than 1 million lives per year in our country alone. Other grave threats to the life and dignity of the human person include euthanasia, gun violence, terrorism, the death penalty, and human trafficking. There's also the redefinition of marriage and gender, threats to religious freedom at home and abroad, lack of justice for the poor, suffering of migrants and refugees, wars and famines around the world, racism, the need for greater access to health care and education, care for our common home, and more. All of these threaten the dignity of the human person. There are so many issues that we are entrusted with the responsibility of evaluating candidates' approaches to these issues. As Catholics, we are not single-issue voters, but the issues we are most concerned about deal with the dignity and life of the human person. And so we need to discern how our candidates that we are electing for office might act towards the common good and not hopefully be caught up in partisan politics that are more focused on getting in power than doing what is actually good for our humanity and for our world. So the church guides us in all the ways we reflect on how to serve these people's needs around us. In many cases, we also have needs as well that need to be addressed. There are so many human rights that are interconnected with one another, flowing from our God-given dignity as being in the image and likeness of God. And we as Catholic voters should consider the framework of Catholic social teaching as we decide what issues we want to stand for through our voting, what goods we are promoting by voting for certain candidates and for various issues. We must look inside ourselves and outside of ourselves at our world to see what are the greatest needs. There are many points that we can reflect on to further develop the things we should resist through the way we vote, but also things we should promote. In our previous session in this series, we looked at how not all candidates are going to have great views or policies for every issue, but if there are issues where candidates might promote an intrinsically evil act, you might decide not to vote for such a person in that case. Some would argue that there are things on both major political parties that have issues. There are minor party candidates to consider as well as the option of not voting if no candidate is morally satisfactory in your judgment. But as we make these judgments, we should think about these issues. There are 11 that the bishops point to as major areas of concern. That would include human life, resisting things that would end human life, abortion, euthanasia, assisted suicide, things that really undermine the life and dignity of the human person, violent crime and war. Things we want to promote are avenues to life in our society, adoption, care for those who are sick and dying, assistance to those who are in greatest need. We want to promote peace in our world, seeking not to escalate conflicts or to initiate acts of aggression, but to deal in a proportionate manner to the evils and attacks that go on in our world, to seek peace and a lessening of violence, promoting things such as nuclear deproliferation, conflict resolution, and promoting people's rights to conscientious objection to unjust war. We want to support humanitarian concerns. We also have the issue of marriage and family life. We want to promote a healthy culture that strengthens families rather than break them down. We desire ways to promote marriage and family, to enable men and women in the bonds of marriage to serve their children, to offer their loving sacrifices in a way that is supported by society. We want to do all that we can for our children. We also want to seek the benefit of the poor and vulnerable through economic justice. We want to resist any form of discrimination in our economy for those who might not be getting what is fair for them. And we want to avoid things that contribute to family breakdown through poverty. The more we seek to serve the needs of those around us through welfare or social services or social security, through strong job wages, the more people are able to, with what they have, give to others. Healthcare is also an important issue. People need access to that and a way to seek the needs of those who are uninsured or underinsured. There's the issue of migration as well. Many people throughout our world are displaced due to war or injustice or economic instability, or most tragically, human trafficking. And so we, as a society, want to promote immigration policy that both respects the dignity of migrants but also protects the borders of countries. And the balance between those things is what our church advocates. There's also the issue of education. And within a Catholic philosophy of education, we want to ensure that we have safe environments for our children to learn, to avoid any obstacles to their formation as a whole person, morally, physically, spiritually, mentally. We want to promote the right of parents to educate their children or choose the education that's best fit for them. We want to promote justice and resist violence. We want to care for our common home as well. Pope Francis has especially highlighted in his papacy our need to act against climate change that most affects those who are in poverty and those who are on the margins, especially in underdeveloped countries, those who are less equipped to deal with the natural disasters and other issues that stem from lack of care for our environment. And we also want to ensure that our media, especially driven by social media and controversy about what's factual, what's opinion, these things should be moderated in a way that respects people's freedom of speech, but also protects our young people against disinformation or offensive material, most especially. And finally, the bishops point to our need for global solidarity, to reach out to those around the world with whom we might have issues in our relationship, but who we should work with to promote well-being of all people throughout the world, to deal with the issue of global poverty and all the many issues we've already outlined today. Through a concern for human rights and international law, we can seek around the world a sense of greater justice and peace. So, in all of these things, the bishops of the United States have not told us who to vote for or exactly how to cast our vote in terms of exactly which policies are the ones that will drive this election. But the Church gives us guidance to reflect on and to form our conscience with an awareness of what our Church teaches, what we've learned from our experience, so that we can do all that we have been entrusted with as people able to vote for responsible citizenship. And it's often the case that many candidates are not perfect. Many candidates have flawed perspectives, flawed policies. So this really requires careful judgment, that we might do our best to make a reasonable choice. We want to ensure we're not promoting evil actions through our votes, but that we evaluate whether candidates might have more good effects than bad effects if they are elected to office. And if there's anything in particular we're concerned about, we might want to vote for or against certain candidates. So please evaluate all your options and use the God-given conscience that has been entrusted to you to make your choice. We have one final session coming up this Sunday on our series of political theology and faithful citizenship. We'll be looking at the relationship between religion and politics. Many people would advocate for a complete wall of separation between religion and politics. Some would say you shouldn't use religion to make political decisions, and your political life really shouldn't have any impact on the way you pray. But that's not quite right. There is a certain separation that should exist because they are different things, but there's a lot of common ground between the two things if viewed rightly. And there are some pitfalls we can avoid falling into if we understand how religion and politics can work together rather than against each other. So if you're able, come join us for our final session in our series on political theology this Sunday in our chapel between the 9 and 11 Masses.